Robert Christian Hansen was born on February 15, 1939, in Estherville, Iowa. He endured a childhood marked by a strict, overbearing father and a profound sense of isolation. As a boy, he developed a stutter and severe acne, conditions that made him a frequent target for bullies. It was during these formative years that a deep-seated hatred towards women began to take root. In 1967, Hansen moved to Anchorage, Alaska, hoping for a fresh start. He established a successful bakery, became a husband and a father, and, to the outside world, appeared to be a model citizen. But hidden behind the warmth of the oven and the sweetness of the pastries lurked a cold, calculating predator. His violent urges began to surface in the early 1970s. He specifically targeted sex workers and exotic dancers, women he chillingly believed society wouldn't miss or even bother to look for. Hansen would lure them into his car or home, abduct them, and then fly them by private plane into the vast, remote wilderness of Alaska. There, in the icy, desolate forests, far from any hope of help, he would set them free, only to hunt them down like animals, using a rifle and a knife. Many vanished, but for years, no one connected the dots. Police often overlooked the emerging patterns, dismissing the missing women as mere runaways or transients. That all changed on June 13, 1983. 17-year-old Cindy Paulson managed a desperate escape from Hansen's clutches. She ran barefoot through the streets, handcuffed and utterly terrified. Her harrowing testimony would be the key that broke the case wide open. In 1984, Hansen was arrested and subsequently confessed. He admitted to murdering at least 17 women and raping more than 30 others. Investigators made a chilling discovery in his home: a hidden map marked with the locations of dozens of shallow graves. He was sentenced to 461 years plus life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Robert Hansen died in prison in 2014 from natural causes. To the public, he became infamously known as the Butcher Baker.
Richard Trenton Chase was born on May 23, 1950, in California. From a young age, he displayed disturbing behavior, harming animals, starting fires, and showing signs of deep mental illness. By his mid-20s, Chase had become obsessed with the idea that his blood was turning to powder. He believed people were poisoning him and that he needed to drink blood to survive. In December 1977, the nightmare began. Chase broke into a man's home and shot him at point-blank range. But that was only the beginning. Over the next month, he murdered 6 people, including a pregnant woman, a 22-month-old baby, and a 6-year-old boy. He drank their blood, mutilated their bodies, and even ate parts of them. He chose his victims at random, often breaking into homes during the day. One woman escaped only because her door was locked. Chase later told police he saw that as a sign he wasn't welcome. Police arrested him in January 1978. Inside his apartment, they found blood-stained blenders, body parts in the fridge, and walls smeared with blood. In 1979, Richard Chase was convicted of 6 counts of murder and sentenced to death. But he never made it to the gas chamber. 1 year later, he committed suicide in his cell by overdosing on antidepressants. He left behind a trail of pure horror, and a nickname the media would never forget: the Vampire of Sacramento.
In 1988, Tokyo was gripped by a wave of horror. A man was abducting little girls between the ages of 4 and 7. He took them to remote mountains, murdered them, and committed unspeakable acts. His name was Tsutomu Miyazaki, a quiet, isolated man who lived in a cluttered room filled with anime, horror tapes, and disturbing materials. He strangled his victims, mutilated their corpses, and sometimes returned days later to revisit the remains. In one horrifying case, he mailed ashes and bones of a 7-year-old girl to her grieving family, along with a chilling letter describing how she died. When police raided his home, they found more than 5,000 videotapes. The media called him the otaku killer, blaming his obsession with violent pop culture. He claimed an alternate personality named Rat Man committed the murders. Psychiatrists argued over whether he was insane. In 1997, Tsutomu Miyazaki was sentenced to death. He was executed in 2008. His crimes remain among Japan's most disturbing, a reminder of how fantasy and violence can collide in terrifying ways. Tsutomu Miyazaki, the Otaku Killer.
Daniel Camargo Barbosa was born in Colombia in 1930. His life of violence began early, first with petty crimes, then with rape and murder. He would later become one of Latin America's most prolific serial killers. After serving time in Colombia, he escaped prison by disguising himself as a woman. He fled to Ecuador, where his crimes escalated. Between 1984 and 1986, Camargo raped and murdered at least 54 young girls. He lured them with gifts or promises of work, then took them into the forest. His attacks were brutal. He often mutilated his victims and left their bodies exposed to be found. In 1986, police found one of his victims' shoes near a crime scene. That clue led to his arrest. During interrogation, Camargo confessed to the murders and claimed he was taking revenge on society because a woman once betrayed him. He was sentenced to just 16 years in prison, the maximum in Ecuador at the time. But in 1994, while still in prison, he was stabbed to death by the cousin of one of his victims. To the public, he became known as the Sadist of Ecuador. Pedro Alonso Lopez was born in Colombia in 1948. His crime shocked the world. His troubled childhood began with abuse, abandonment, and time on the streets. He was regularly sexually assaulted while living on the streets of Bogotá as a homeless child. A stranger on the street offered him a sleeping bed to lure him into his trap as he took him to an abandoned building and sexually molested him. He joined a gang of child protection while seeking safety after the event. At age 18, he was imprisoned for car theft, and there he claimed to have been assaulted. After his release, he began a spree of unimaginable violence. Between the late 1970s and early 1980s, Lopez lured young girls from poor villages in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He gained their trust, then led them into isolated areas to assault and murder them. He later confessed to killing over 300 girls. In Ecuador alone, police found the graves of more than 50 victims, just where he said they'd be. Lopez was arrested in 1980. He cooperated with police, showed no remorse, and even referred to the murders as his mission. In 1983, he was convicted of 110 murders, but received only 16 years in prison, Ecuador's maximum sentence at the time. He was released in 1994, declared insane, and sent to a psychiatric hospital in Colombia. A few years later, he was released again. His current whereabouts are unknown. To the public, he became known as the Monster of the Andes.
Rodney Alcala seemed like an ordinary man, charming, educated, and artistic. In the 1970s, he even appeared on the popular television show The Dating Game, smiling confidently on national TV. But behind the camera, he led a life of disturbing darkness. A photographer by trade, Alcala lured his victims, mostly young women and girls, by offering to take their portraits. Once alone, he would trap them in a nightmare. he was convicted of killing 5 people, but investigators believe the true number may be over 100. His crime spanned decades and several U.S. states. In many cases, he photographed the victims before and even during the attacks. Police later found over 1,000 disturbing photos in a storage locker. What shocked the world most was his calm demeanor. Even while on trial, Alcala represented himself, speaking with confidence and showing no visible remorse. Although we cannot get inside his mind, a combination of pathological needs for power and control, the fulfillment of sadistic and sexual fantasies, and narcissistic and psychopathic personality traits was likely the driving force behind the atrocities he committed. In 2010, he was sentenced to death. He later received multiple additional life sentences for further crimes. Alcala died in prison in 2021 at age 77. To the public, he became known as the dating game killer.
Andrei Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union. His early life was marked by famine, poverty, and trauma, including rumors that his older brother had been kidnapped and eaten during Holodomor. As an adult, Chikatilo struggled with violent urges and deep psychological issues. He became a teacher, but was dismissed after accusations of inappropriate behavior with students. Between 1978 and 1990, Chikatilo murdered at least 52 people, mostly children and teenagers. He lured victims from train stations or bus stops, taking them into forests or abandoned buildings. His crimes were brutal. Victims were often mutilated, and some were disemboweled. Many showed signs of torture. For years, Soviet authorities failed to catch him. In a system that denied the existence of serial killers, critical leads were ignored. Chikatilo was finally arrested in 1990 after behaving suspiciously at a train station. His detailed confession shocked the nation. In 1992, he was found guilty of 52 murders and sentenced to death. He was executed by a single gunshot in 1994. To the public, he became known as the Butcher of Rostov.
John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago on March 17, 1942. To the public, he was a friendly businessman, active in his community, even known as Pogo the Clown, a cheerful entertainer at children's parties. But behind the smiling face and painted mask lay a darkness beyond imagination. Between 1972 and 1978, in the suburbs of Chicago, Gacy lived a secret double life. He lured dozens of teenage boys and young men to his home using various promises and manipulations. Once trapped, the victims were subjected to horrific abuse before their lives were taken. The veil of horror began to lift when an investigation into a missing teen led straight to Gacy's house. There, in the cold basement, authorities uncovered a gruesome scene. Dozens of buried bodies, silent witnesses to cruelty that had long remained hidden. Gacy was arrested in late 1978. In 1980, he was found guilty of murdering 33 people, a crime that led to a death sentence. But what drove him to commit such acts of brutality? Gacy's childhood was marked by emotional trauma and a harsh, abusive father. Experts believe deep psychological wounds and a pathological desire for control fueled the darkness within him. John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection in 1994. A chilling reminder that even the most monstrous evil can wear the mask of a clown. To the world, he will forever be known as the Killer Clown.
Albert Fish was born on May 19, 1870, in Washington, D.C. To the world, he appeared as a frail old man, soft-spoken, polite, unassuming. But behind that gentle face lurked one of the darkest minds in criminal history. Raised in an abusive orphanage and scarred by childhood trauma, Fish began to associate pain with pleasure. He soon developed disturbing urges that escalated into acts of violence against children. His victims were lured with kindness, promises of food, safety, or a job. But once alone, they were subjected to torture that defies imagination. Fish didn't just harm his victims, he fed on their suffering. In 1928, he abducted 10-year-old Grace, but under the pretense of taking her to a party. Years later, he sent a letter to her parents, calmly describing how he had killed and consumed their daughter. It wasn't an apology, it was a final act of cruelty. Fish was arrested in 1934 after years of evading capture. He confessed to multiple murders, though only 3 were confirmed. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with severe mental illness, yet he was still deemed fit for trial. In 1936, Albert Fish was executed by electric chair, but the horror of his crimes left a permanent scar on the nation's memory. He wasn't infamous for the number of victims, but for the unimaginable terror he inflicted. To the public, he became known as the Boogeyman.
Luis Alfredo Garavito, born in Colombia on January 25, 1957. From childhood, his life was already burdened by suffering, a cruel father, poverty, and pervasive violence. His past was not merely tragic, that trauma never faded, until eventually it erupted into unimaginable terror. Between 1992 and 1999, Garavito became an unstoppable predator. He operated in Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela, targeting impoverished boys aged 6 to 16. Disguised as a teacher, priest, farmer, or philanthropist, he would approach his victims. Garavito would lead them to secluded places, and there, he committed his atrocities. Upon his arrest in 1999, he confessed to killing 138 children. However, the gravesite maps he drew himself revealed a far more horrifying number. Authorities believe the victim count could exceed 300 lives. This makes Garavito one of the most prolific child murderers ever recorded in human history. In 2000, he was sentenced to a total of 1,853 years in prison. Yet due to Colombia's legal system, his sentence was commuted to a maximum of 40 years. Public outrage ensued and strong pressure ensured his sentence was not further reduced, keeping him imprisoned until his death on October 12, 2023. He didn't just kill, he silenced a generation. He didn't just create wounds, he built a museum of suffering, with each victim as a part of its walls. Luis Alfredo Garavito didn't just become a part of Colombia's dark history. He was its peak, La Bestia, the beast,